Hi, and welcome to the Sheep Connect South Australia webinar on managing soils after fires. I'm Jodie Rizzo O'Brien, and I'm one of the Sheep Connect SA team. Sheep Connect is supported through funding from Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, and Primary Industries and Region South Australia. Today's webinar is supported by the South Australian Murray-Darling Basin and the Adelaide and Mount Lofty Ranges Natural Resources Management Boards through funding from the Australian Government's National Landcare Program and NRM levies. If you want more information about Sheep Connect, you can go to our website, sheepconnectsa.com.au, or you can follow us on Twitter at sheepconnectsa. Today's webinar is presented by Brian Hughes. Brian's Principal Consultant in Soil and Land Management at our Nuruyupta office. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Jodie. Welcome. We'll just be talking about recovering from fire and the soil issues related to that. I suppose this information has come from a number of soil consultants around the state, and I suppose our experience historically through looking at or being involved with fires through Wangari, Bangor, Eden Valley, Samson Flat, Pinery and Sherwood fires, as well as some Victorian reports, should add each of these fires have a sort of different impact in some ways. The land use is quite different, and the soils and landscape issues, which I suppose means in some cases that the issues are quite different, with some similarities. Just wanting to move on to, I suppose, what are the impacts in terms of the, I suppose, soil burn classes, and I've sort of split them into three groups here, what we call cool, moderate and hot to very hot. And I suppose just starting off with the cool ones, really the cool ones where you still get some unburnt surface vegetation still present. Some of the surface seeds are present, the perennials and the subclover, which actually puts its seeds into the ground a bit, should come back fairly quickly. And I suppose you should be able to get back to a sort of full carrying capacity within 12 months. And I suppose looking at them, you will see the some of the sort of vegetation still present in these areas. An example there from Birdwood this year. The second class I wanted to talk about was the moderate burn classes, and I suppose in this case some examples from Gumaraka and I suppose also Charleston. Often on the moderate burn areas, it'll actually look quite burnt, but you can still see some of the crowns and the plant shape still present. Most of the surface seeds will be destroyed, so things above the ground. However, things like some of the perennials and certainly subclover will possibly come back. And I suppose if in doubt, check it with a pasture germination test, which I'll talk about a bit later. You'd expect to get up to 70% carrying capacity within 12 months on moderate burn areas. And I should also add with the moderate burn areas, my experience, I suppose certainly a lot of the, I suppose from Pinery and also the Samson Flat fires and many of the areas that we see under pasture or cropping, that's probably the main category that you see in those cleared areas. You will find some hot to very hot burn areas, which is a more severe category. An example from Gumaraka and Birdwood, topsoil often appears really charred and bare, and the ash may blow off. Common under trees where there's a lot more fuel for the fire, long grass or stubble in some cases where the fire is moving fairly slowly. Certainly under haystacks and bonfire scars, I suppose, that we all know about are some more severe examples of the sort of very hot fire category. And in this case, I suppose, we do see a lot of the surface seeds are destroyed, and many of the perennials and clovers and are affected. And to some extent, I suppose, the soil seems to become sterile when you look at it. Certainly if there's big areas of this, you need to probably look at re-sowing, and you can have quite a long-term effect on these. And the one to think about, which is the most extreme one, is where you have your bonfire in the paddock, how long that lasts, I suppose, before it reverts back to normal. So those sort of the three categories, I suppose, in terms of soil damage from fires. Wanted also to talk about, I suppose, is just the risk of wind erosion following fire. So wind erosion can be significant. It was very significant on Eyre Peninsula and in Pinery and some of the other fires we've seen, not so much in Adelaide Hills. But the risk factors really tend to be sand to sandy loam soils, a moderate to hot burn, so there's really no cover left in the soil, and seems to be more significant under cropping where the soil's a bit looser, and I suppose you also need some wind events. The examples there down below. Wind erosion, what can you do about it? You know, we always say, you know, before you do anything, is do nothing a better option? You sometimes see under the soil, if you get out with a shovel and dig some holes, you might find the crowns are actually still there. There's just some loose material on top, or the soil has become a bit armoured. And there's a bit of an example there from Eyre Peninsula where the soil had quite a hard surface underneath. I suppose a bit of stuff that was drifting around on top. Certainly things like keeping stock and vehicles off. If the soil is a particularly sandy soil and you're intending to clay or delve it, well, is certainly a good time to do that following fire. Emergency tillage is an option on the sandy loams that was used very well around pinery. If you're looking at emergency tillage, you need to make sure that you can bring up clumps of soil about fist size, as you can see in the photo there, that have a bit of strength and to maintain it. If it's too sandy, it'll revert back to what it was fairly quickly. So it works quite well with sandy loams. And normally once you get heavier texture than that, the wind erosion is not much of an issue. If there's significant buildings or other things you want to protect, things like hay bales or shade cloth fencing can be placed as well. Just examples there, certainly some clayed country that happened after the pinery fire, and also some emergency tillage in a really dusty day, and you can see how the lumps there are actually holding together quite nicely. Water erosion is another consideration. That's something which often seems to happen after fire. We get a deluge, I suppose, and certainly long and steep slopes are worse. Again, keeping stock and vehicles off, and also if there's a bit of a green pick, just keeping the stock out of there long enough so that you get good cover before they get back into the paddock. Often we see that rain after a fire, and it creates a green pick, and that may even die off before autumn anyway. Example below there from Birdwood of someone who's placed out some hay bale filters on drainage lines and just wanting to sort of capture some of the silt and ash if they have a runoff event. We did some work looking at the impact on soil fertility of the different burn classes following the Samson's flat fire on a property at Gumaraka, and these are just sort of point source information. But I suppose some of the key points that came through that, and we really compared, I suppose, some areas under a tree that were quite badly burnt or hot to very hotly burnt, some ash that we selected just off the top 2 centimetres of soil, a hot burn area, again in that category where you could see the soil had an impact on the soil, and moderate burn, which had some pasture emerging, and again using 0 to 6 centimetre sampling times on that. And if you look at the pH, for example, you can see the ash is actually quite alkaline, and it has more of an impact under the tree, at a slightly lesser extent, I suppose, under the hot burn and the moderate burn, where the pHs are back to 5.5 under the, I suppose, moderate burn, which is probably what it was before the fire. So where you've got lots of ash, it will make it a bit more alkaline. It's probably something which disappears pretty quickly if you think about it. It really came out of the vegetation above it. The second thing we looked at there, comparing, I suppose, the moderate to hot burn and ash, was the organic carbon. And on this one, you can see that the hot burn seems to have a slight effect in reducing organic carbon, while the normal pasture or the moderate burn area had a higher organic carbon, quite high levels, because it was a 0 to 6 centimetre sample in a pretty good perennial pasture as well. So yeah, organic carbon certainly dropped under the hot burn. If you look at what's in the ash, it's interesting in the sense that there's a lot of phosphorus there. And if we look at the ash and the hot burn areas, all have quite a bit of phosphorus showing up. So that phosphorus has stayed in the ash, and provided you don't lose the ash, that'll stay there. And with it, I think our higher levels of things like potassium, calcium, magnesium, and as somebody said, even manganese, we picked up as being higher in those hot burn and within the ash, I suppose, in those situations, compared to the normal pasture that was a bit lower. So I suppose the point there is, provided your ash doesn't blow away or wash away, you will keep some of that nutrient in the system there, particularly things like P and K. on a different line, but the thing that's really missing, I suppose, in the hot burn areas compared to the moderate burn is anything linked to oxygen. So I suppose the nitrate, for example, which has oxygen in it, has pretty well disappeared out of that system due to the higher level of burning occurring in there. You've actually, I suppose, burned off all the nitrogen in those hot burn areas under the trees or in the paddock and in the ash compared to the moderate burn in the pasture, where there's still a reasonable amount present. And that, I suppose, is one of the reasons it looks pretty sterile. We did do some soil biology testing of the burn classes from these soil samples as well. Now, this test, we should highlight, is really a potential biological activity test. And they actually take it in the lab and they incubate it. And the interesting thing was that we still seem to find soil microbial biomass present in I suppose, in the actual, and also active within the areas that had been burnt. So, the bugs are still there to some extent, I suppose, but, they through the lab tests, they do incubate that up, I suppose, to get it moving. Now, just on to some other stuff, soil testing. I mean, we certainly would suggest paddocks that you're looking at soil testing, or we're going to soil test anyway, go ahead and do them again. You probably need to look at avoiding any pockets of ash when you're actually sampling, as that'll distort the results. You'll get that alkaline effect. And I would, look at applying and fertilising and I suppose renovating pastures as per normal. Certainly, if you're getting a low pH or whatever, you treat that as per normal, and just avoid the ash when sampling. The other thing to suggest is, if you're wondering whether you need to see what's there, you can wet up areas and test for germination using like a 15 to 30 centimetre ring and putting at least 50 mils of water in it and see what comes back up, I suppose, is a good way of just having a look at the pasture and what's present. And I think probably that's about where I'm going to leave it for now. So as a bit of an introduction to some of the issues that we've picked up so far from fire-affected soils.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great overview of considerations to think about with your soils after a bushfire. I guess those key messages there about keeping livestock off and vehicles off fire-affected areas is the key one that came through.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks, Brian, for presenting our webinar today. I'd like to acknowledge our funders that brought you today's webinar. Have a lovely afternoon, and we look forward to catching you next time.